Excited to introduce our speaker for today, longtime friend and colleague of mine, Jim Oakleaf. Was at WyGISC for a long time and has been with the Nature Conservancy now for more than 10 years. Yeah, so I'll let him kind of introduce himself and what he's going to talk about, but please join me in welcoming Jim Oakleaf.
Thanks, Jeff. As Jeff mentioned, my name is Jim Oakleaf. I work in the Global Protects Ocean, Lands, and Water team at TNC. And when I was riding my bike over here, I was thinking about my path to get exactly here. How did I get to the point where I have such a great job? I'm working in places all over the world. This isn't actually India. This is Mongolia, another place that I work in. And working for such a great organization that I really believe strongly in their mission. And I was just really thinking back on actually my time here at the university. And I remember about 25 years ago, I can't believe it, but many of you I've known since then. I was getting a master's, I was part-time. I was working at a restaurant, cooking, washing dishes, bartending, and spending most of my money at the Buckhorn, a little bit lost. I have to say though, that the Buckhorn hasn't changed. I was just there over homecoming. In fact, it might even gotten a little worse because the smoke, nobody's smoking in there and it doesn't mask the stench that comes up from the bathroom. But anyways, so I was kind of lost, and I remember just taking my first GIS class. Somebody said, "Hey, this sounds like a good class." I was in geography, and so I took the class. And the first semester, I just fell in love with it. And then the second semester, I happened to see this ad for a job working at the water center doing GIS, and the job was actually. Let's see, how do I forward these? Lucky. There we go. The job was actually for digitizing 2-foot contour lines for coal mining reclamation project. And if you guys remember these, we had these huge tablets, right? And we had this little bullseye, and we put these paper maps on there. And I don't even know what the other digits were for. All you did was this 2, 1, 1, 1, 1, and you just follow those in detail, and it would be super mind-numbing. But I loved it. It was just so much better than washing dishes, cooking, and spending. Well, I made a little bit more money, so I should spend money down at Buckhorn still. It was just fabulous. And then moving it into a computer and seeing that kind of come to life was just wonderful. And then along the way, another person I met, who you see here and know well, was Jeff Hammerling, and he was very much my mentor, pushed me to finish up my master's, to really get on with life, honestly. And so I owe a lot when I think about where I'm going, where I've been to this guy. So thanks, Jeff, and thanks for all the things you've done for me personally, and all the things you're doing for the university here and for all of us. So, thank you, Jeff. So I'm not just going to talk about Jeff. I want to start. Although I could, I'm going to start this timer because I know I'll be rambling on, and I want to at least get to the end and show you some of the applications that I'm actually working on. So where I'm going to go is I'm going to talk about TNC real briefly. How many people know about TNC, the Nature Conservancy? Okay, this will be really quick then. Then I'll just jump into basically the title of my talk and talking about the work that we're doing in India, and give you a brief background on why TNC is not only working in India, but working in this space of renewable energy siting. And then I'll talk about why India. And then talk about the spatial analysis that we go into, and then finally go into the tools that are developed there using all this data. That there is actually in India, in the far northeast corner of India. It's called the Sleeping Buddha. So again, I'm going to be quick. The Nature Conservancy's mission is to conserve lands and waters which all life depends on. You know, we have a vision statement you can see here. It's basically looking at a world where the diversity of life thrives and people kind of act on their own to conserve nature for its own sake. We work across the globe and in every state in the US. We're in now over 76 countries. This number changes every year. You can never keep up, but here's a map of the different countries that we're currently working in. We have over 4,000 employees, again, working over 76 countries. This is really what most people think about when you think about TNC, is the amount of acres that we've either preserved or put conservation easements on. And we've also, which is over 103 million acres. I think that number is quite a bit larger. And then we have over 5,000 miles of rivers protected that we've helped protect. And we've done conservation projects in over 100 marine areas. We're supported by over 1 million members, and we're actually the largest NGO as far as financial holdings. Members, our employees wise, WWF, World Wildlife Fund, is a bigger organization, but financially, we're the biggest NGO, conservation NGO in the world. And we have more than 500 scientists on staff, which I'm included in. Those of you that know about the Wyoming TNC chapter, I just threw up a couple of, or a slide for the Wyoming chapter, just give it some props. I don't actually work with the Wyoming chapter. In fact, I met the first person from the Wyoming chapter just yesterday on Zoom. So it's not something that I do a lot, but I'm trying to connect more with the Wyoming chapter. Here, I just grabbed a screen slide of their webpage. So they have over 300,000 acres conserved. And I think with their partners too, they have over 1 million acres that they've helped preserve. And you'll see a bunch of the other numbers. I did want to throw up a map here and showing the different preserves across Wyoming. Hopefully you've gone and visited some of these preserves. One of my favorite is in Tinsleep, the big red dot there. I grew up in Lander, so Red Canyon Ranch and the Sweetwater Preserve are two places that I visit quite often. And I was down in the last 8 years prior to moving back to Laramie. I was in Fort Collins, and the Phantom Canyon Preserve, which I've taken Jeff and Ed fishing before, is just south of Laramie here. And if you ever get a chance to visit it, it's quite amazing. If you're driving down to Fort Collins, you know how there's that passing lane coming out of Fort Collins, and there's these plains. There's a lot of open space. Well, TNC has done a lot to put conservation easements in that whole area. And then we have a preserve that's off to the west as you're driving down there, and it's fabulous. It's right below a dam, and in this canyon, you drive up to it, you wouldn't believe it's there. So if you ever get a chance, it's a really interesting place to go. So like I said, we're a global organization. Just recently, we came out with our 2030 goals, and these are monumental goals for our organization. If you look at some of these, we have over 3 gigatons of CO2 equivalent per year in greenhouse gas mitigations that we're striving for by 2030. When we look at the different realms across the world, oceans, freshwater, and lands, we really do 3 main things: protect area, improve management, and try to avoid conversion in those areas. So you can see in oceans, for example, we have a goal of 4 billion hectares. That's the size of the Atlantic Ocean. So huge goal there. 1 million kilometers for freshwater rivers. That would equal 25 times circumventing the Earth. 300 million hectares, excuse me, of freshwater. That'd be about the size of New Mexico. 650 million hectares of land, which would basically be all the land west of the Mississippi River. And then we also have some people goals directed towards empowering people out there on the land and are using the ocean and using the fresh water. And that's a goal of 25 million. That's about 1/10 of the indigenous people globally. So again, monumental goals that we're trying to achieve across the globe. So when you look at those goals, we're not going to do those all in the United States, obviously. And so we're doing a lot of work globally. And my team specifically goes and works with country business units and helps give them the capacity to do the type of planning necessary, conservation planning necessary to meet their portion of the goals. So why is TNC kind of in this space of renewable siting? Well, for one, if we're going to try to meet those emission goals globally, we can't just be running around planting trees, right? Can't plant enough trees to meet those goals. So what we have to do is help countries go from fossil fuels and transfer to using renewables. And we see that as a major method in reaching that goal. And we're trying to implement this in several places across the globe. We also have a strong leadership, obviously, in conservation planning, but also consensus building. And when I go through our process, you'll see that there's a lot of steps along the way that involve consensus building and really getting people to buy off on what you're proposing for them to do to help site these renewables in the right place. My current boss, Joe Kiesecker, is a real leader and thought leader in this whole space of development by design. And this is the idea of blending conservation planning and the mitigation hierarchy. And interesting enough, his first attempt, his first actual use of this concept was here in Wyoming in the Jonah Field. And he got millions of dollars in offsets to help conserve areas around Pinedale. He also, back in 2011, published this paper, A Win-Win for Wildlife. And that was really this first step for TNC to really look at sustainable development of renewables. So he is the real thought leader for TNC and why we're probably in this space, I would say. So some of the challenges we have is in order to meet the goals across the globe for renewable, we really need 10 times the current build out. And with that 10 times the current build out, that's going to require a lot of land for solar and wind development. When you're talking about a lot of land, you're also talking about conflicts with environmental issues, social issues, and land use issues. And then a lot of times these conflicts, what happens is it slows down the process of transferring to these renewable systems away from fossil fuels, and we can't slow down. We just don't have time for that. So we did a paper, I can't even remember when this was. It was back in 2011, I think, or sometime back, or 2019. So it actually started probably about 2017. We did a global assessment, and we looked at the goals of all countries up to, I think it was 2022, trying to understand what they need from renewables as they transfer from fossil fuels or transition from fossil fuels. And what we found is that the globe can meet 17 times their required power needs through renewables by siting them on non-natural lands or converted lands. So the room's there to maneuver this and actually make this transition without damaging other lands or other natural lands. And so it's just the process of planning that really needs to occur. So why India? I wish Ramesh was here. He could probably add to this, but it's the largest, it will be the largest populated country by 2025. They even think 2024. About 1.4 billion. It's a third the size of the US, and it has a much higher, obviously, density of people, about 428 people per kilometer squared. Third highest in CO2 emission, and that's just going to become larger and larger as they have a growing electrification of households and an expanding middle class. It has the second highest urban expansion rate globally among countries. And you can think of this rate is almost the size of New York City per year. Pretty amazing what's going on there. Also, it has the fourth highest agricultural, it's the fourth highest agriculture producing country. So there's a lot of competition for land here, right? A lot of competition for land and a lot of people on the land. Also, interestingly enough, it's the 8th most biodiverse country, and it actually has the most plants and animals estimated by IUCN with over 50,000 different species. It has the megafaunas you're all familiar with, the iconic species like the tiger. 60% of the total population of the world is found in India. Lions, snow leopards, elephants, go on and on. There's 66 million acres of common land. Almost 20% of India is made up of common land. And these rural people, 350 million rural poor people rely on these common lands for their basic needs. So again, we're getting a lot of competition for land, and these citing these renewables are just going to add to it. On top of this, Modi, who's the president of India, just proposed a 2030 goal of 500 gigawatts of renewables by 2030. So that's approximately 42 gigawatts per year, or roughly 20 million PV panels per year. So that's a huge expansion on renewables. And you can see in the headlines that this is causing lots of conflict. This bustard is a critically endangered species. Kind of think of it like the sage grouse here, but it's more endangered. It's a lot larger. The unfortunate thing about this bird is it flies with its head down. That's not kind of a good thing for running into wind turbines, but we're trying to help prevent loss of this bird. And then there's all sorts of social issues that are happening with siting. So with this common land, the state has the ability to allow for development in these common lands. And what's going on is a lot of times these developers are coming in and saying, hey, get off the land, we're now producing solar here. So we have a team of folks that are working together for siting renewables. Joe Kiesecker, who I already mentioned, is kind of the thought leader and the leader of our group. Mike Heiner did almost all the geospatial analysis. Jeff Evans, I think many of you probably know him. He's here at the University of Wyoming. He did a lot of the predictive modeling, and then myself, who does a lot of the application and using the data, and then Shiva Prakeskin, we all call him Shiva. He is actually the lead person in TNC India. So you can see all of us are with the Global Protects team. We're providing Shiva with the technical know-how and ability to actually get a lot of this work done, because their TNC India is much too small for that. We've also partnered with FES, Foundation for Ecological Security. I'll talk about this, but this is for looking at social issues. Again, the Nature Conservancy India, Vasudha Foundation. These guys are leading in socializing the work that we're doing. And then C-STEP is a technical group for renewable development in India. So I just kind of listed what our project goals were here. And so the first thing is overall, it's not about the spatial data. The spatial data is more about helping them understand where to site. But we're really having a collective effort with all of our partners to help develop siting guidelines in India. Right now, they don't even have the NEPA process. So it's kind of a wild west out there for development. With our analysis work, we're trying to identify go areas, and I'll talk through this. We're promoting the use of existing infrastructure. So like rooftop solar, a new one that's coming on board is basically covering canals with solar panels. And then right now, India does not have any offshore wind. And then we're also pushing for to adapt the existing policies and protocols to incentivize these low conflicts areas. So push companies to actually use these areas that we identify. And then again, I'll be talking about this, deploy a lot of this information into a siting tool so they easily can see and understand where to site these renewables. So with the application, you know, after we kind of went through this whole process, this thought process, and came together as a team, we really first started thinking about the tools that need to be developed, and then the data that needs to support the tools. And all three of these are data that support the tool, and then how to incorporate them into the tools. So we came up with 3 tools, an awareness tool, and this was just to highlight state by state your ability to actually develop renewables in low conflict areas. So just giving people an understanding of that. An assessment tool, this was specifically for developers, so they could go into areas, identify an area, and get back information about that area. And then a planning module, which was targeted towards state agencies to help direct where they're going to incentivize this work. So 2019 to 2020, we first employed all of this for 2 states. Now we're expanding it to 6 other states you see in blue. And then by 2023, we hope to cover the entire India with the tools and data necessary for siting renewables. So the first thing we did for data was we had to understand where these renewable, where the past development occurred. So where solar farms and wind turbines have been actually installed in the past years, because we really wanted to understand, you know, are they actually siting these in places that are in conflict with both the environment and social issues. So we partnered with Microsoft and Planet, and Microsoft created an AI which mapped all the solar farms and wind farms from a satellite image of 2016, and then yearly going forward till 2021, I believe. And what's interesting about that is that, you know, what we can do is by having these stages, we can actually look at the land cover previous to this to understand, previous to this image, to understand what's changing too. This was such a success that we're actually expanding that globally, and this Global Renewables Watch is going to map those on a semi-annual basis from here for quite a while, I think till 2030 right now and onward, using this same technique. So what we found is with solar, it was nailing the ag areas. Big time development was ag. You can see the breakdown in the ag. Kharif and Rabbi, these are basically just seasonal crops. So you can see that the big one was Rabbi, and that's kind of like your winter wheat. So it's a winter crop. And then you can see the double and triple crops are getting hit too. And then fallow, which is interesting because what's going on, what we found is that a lot of the farmers were pushing their land into fallow, so not planting. And the reason they're doing it is that supposedly they can then sell it to developers to then put solar on it. So we were seeing a decrease in crop production by going to fallow so they could convert it. With wind, we saw a lot in agriculture areas, but we really identify this as a co-benefit because you can still grow your ag with wind turbines. So this wasn't as much of a conflict, but still the natural habitats was 5%. And with those huge goals, we're actually going to see probably more conflict. One interesting thing about the AI and mapping these wind turbines, can anybody guess what they were using to actually identify the location of wind turbines?
Shadows.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah, I was kind of shocked, but they would see the shadows and then map them on that. So the predictive modeling which Jeff Evans did was really about looking at using these past patterns to understand where is the highest development potential for both wind and solar. So we had this presence data from the AI for both turbines and solar farms. Then we did a random null, applied these to the model, considering these parameters here by using data that we had available to us. With these parameters and through his analysis, these are the parameters that were actually selected in the model. You can see that distance to smaller populated towns didn't come out in either of the models, nor did distance to any road, because there's a lot of roads, so it's pretty random, or distance to railroads. Interestingly, distance to major roads for solar wasn't used, but was used in wind because of the moving the large turbines. And then the resource for each. This is the kind of the importance of each of the variables. You'll see for solar, major substations was the most important criteria. You'll notice too here that it's a steep decline in the probability of the presence of a solar farm rapidly as you move away from these large substations. So that's what this curve here is indicating. Whereas the distance from transmission lines was much more gradual to a certain limit and then dropped off. So there was a kind of a distance relationship there for transmission lines for solar. Interestingly, on wind, well, if I should back up, you can see that solar here was one of the lower ones, which is just how much the sun is shining. Anybody guess why that was so low? Sun's shining basically everywhere in India, right? There's not much variability across India on solar intensity. But when we go to wind, you can see that wind speeds was the #1 factor. And you can see the curve here, as you go to about 7 meters per second, it jumps up and then levels off. So that's a kind of the threshold when wind turbines are being developed. I threw in the city one, which was interesting for wind. You can see this hump here, which kind of is this NIMBY idea, right? Not a lot of people want these giant wind turbines around their town. Some people do. Cheyenne loves them, right? But you can see how it jumps up more or at a certain distance away from towns. So we combine all that and produce these development potential maps. And what you see in red are the highest areas for future development for both solar and wind. So the next thing we do is we go through, and this process takes a lot longer than the modeling process that I just showed you, because we have to go through a process of consulting with all the different players in the renewable energy field and get their buy-in to actually identifying these low conflict or no-go areas. So the process is basically meeting with all these different folks, identifying the data that's available. India has kind of more of a British system, so you have to buy data. We're trying to do this with open data. And then you have to get experts to agree on what categories are actually no-go areas for development. And that could be really hard, as many of you probably understand with the sage-grouse issue. And then we go through the process of just spatial analysis, aligning it, doing the overlays, and then setting a requirement for a minimum size on development. And then we intersect that with the modeling effort to identify no-go or identify low conflict areas or go areas with high development potential, so that they get a win-win for the developers. And then we do too for the environment. So here you can see a list of the exclusions that we went through. In green are the environmental ones. So for solar, we excluded all ag lands. And then the rest are similar across solar and wind. Then on the technical side of, where you can actually develop wind and solar, we did a couple of basically buffering around population centers, buffering around airports. One was a bit higher than the other, so wind, we had a bigger buffer. And then we excluded steep slopes for both wind and solar, with solar being excluded on lower angled slopes. And then we also excluded areas that already had the wind and solar. Most of our data what came actually from a land use land cover data set that was produced by the Indian Space Research Organization. So you can see a lot of the crop and forest and water data. It was basically just taking these categories out. So this really defined our resolution across India for our data and our application. Then we just went through the process, as you guys are probably all familiar with, doing your GIS analysis. Here I'm actually just showing one of the states, Karnataka, but we do this for all the states that I've showed. So we identify those forested areas, those populated areas with buffer, roads, rail, airports with buffer, protected areas, the different slopes, water. And then we look at the croplands, exclude those, and then exclude low wind speed areas. So a lot of things being excluded, right? So you can see here that for Karnataka, technically for a technical only, there was only 4% that was actually excluded. Environmentally, 72%, majority of that was the croplands. And then both technical and environmental was 20%. What does that leave you with, right? So when you stack them up, take what's remaining in this gray, you get 4% that's actually left that's identified in this red area. And you look at that and you go, holy cow, these guys can't develop anything. But the reality of it is there's the capacity on the low end of 103 gigawatts of power in those areas with solar. Solar is a smaller footprint. That's 2 to 4 times the capacity of the currently installed solar in India. So there's still a lot of room to wiggle and produce solar in this area. And then, like I described before, we intersect that with the solar development potential. And you can see that we're highlighting those areas in red here that have the highest solar development potential based on past solar development. So you can see those smaller areas, the GO areas with high development potential have about 11 gigawatts of power available. Do the same thing for wind. Obviously, the exclusions are much less because we're not excluding crop. We go through the process. Previous with solar, we were looking at continuous areas of 1 kilometer or greater. With wind, it's continuous areas of 5 kilometers or greater. And that produces a large chunk of Karnataka available for development of wind. And again, we go through that same process of intersecting them to then identify those areas that have low conflict and high development potential for wind development. A few of the more important data sources that actually are not going into the low conflict. One is a village level social assessment that we worked with FES to actually rank the conflict for developing for social issues in a village by village setting. So basically this cumulative score is made up of all these different scores. Mainly the first 7 or 8 are on dependence on the common land that I talked about previously. And the population up here that are actually using those common lands. And then the remoteness of these villages to the ability to do something different than use the land. So all 12 of those are brought together into a cumulative index score for each of the states. We also use this, this area of habitat model. Basically, it's a range map. It's a global data set. That's a range map that then is refined based on knowing what land cover is being used by that species and the elevation range of that species, which narrows down the actual area of that area of habitat. This is produced by IUCN. And you'll see here that it's mainly focused on vertebrates. And it doesn't cover all of them. So, you know, T&E count in India is about 1,200. We only had, you know, a fifth of those available and mapped. So we didn't want to put that in the exclusions because that's not all the information. We want them to go out and do their own research. So here's just an example for Karnataka. We basically take these AOIs and clip them all down for the critically endangered, endangered, and vulnerable, and put them into the tool for reporting purposes. A couple other data sets that we feel are important but don't limit development is the reforestation potential. Basically, this is kind of a buffer around trees. Honestly, we're working on a better product here, but that's the main focus there. And then this open natural ecosystem, these are natural areas that aren't forested, like desert and savannas, that we feel are important, but this data source actually is not super accurate, and so we didn't want to make it an exclusion. So that leads to me going into the applications that I produced and how we took all this information in for each state and allow both developers and state planners to actually use this information. So I'll run these real quick. Oh, I already have them up. Let me expand the window here. There we go. Okay. So this first one is the assessment tool. And you'll notice that it jumps right to the state of interest. As most of you are familiar with these mapping tools, it has the ability to turn on and turn off all the information. So you have all the information that I just talked about or that was used in the modeling efforts in here to be able to look at the different information available. You can get information on it by just clicking on this ellipsoid. You can actually change the opacity or the RN. You can move these up and down to put one on top of the other. So a lot of the basic things that you can do in most of these web mapping applications. And then there's a legend tool, and then there's a mapping tool, or a tool that produces a map. The major component of this, though, is the ability for developers to come in here and draw a boundary or bring in a boundary. And it would be a zipped shapefile. So here I'm just going to select a project boundary. It zooms into that. I'm going to turn off some of these layers I have on. You just name the project, test, and add that project. So what this does is allows a developer to come in and add several different projects that they might have. And then from here, they can actually go in and select that, test, add additional notes, and then create a report for either solar or wind. So what it does is it goes out to the server. It's a geoprocessing server, and it's taking in a lot of this information that's in the application and putting it into a HTML report that then can be shared or kept for the developer for for their use in the developing process. So when you click on it, it just produces the report. Look pretty familiar, Margot, producing reports. It's kind of funny, like Margot did this almost 15 years ago in Wyoming. this same sort of activity, did it for the NEPA process. And here I am doing it for India. I mean, it just keeps going and going. And that's what people want. They want one button to understand all of our GIS information. But you got to give them what they want if they're going to actually use it. So it just goes through, identifies the project location, identifies what districts and sub-districts you're in, identifies within that polygon area the amount of low conflict suitable areas for development. So again, with solar, it was 1 kilometer continuous area or greater. And then it identifies the exclusions. So you can see that there's technical exclusions and environmental exclusions. Gives a rough estimate on the capacity in that project area and the amount of power that could be generated. Goes through and gives the social assessment. So it gives the overall score for the social assessment. You can see this is kind of on the medium low side for social conflict. It identifies where the major subcomponent conflicts are by listing it out. It then goes into, produces, I should say, a report on the different environmental assessment and details out in that project area, how many hectares were found with that specific exclusion and the % of the project area. Lists out the endangered species, threatened and endangered species that could be found in that area. Gives you some more information on those other environmental information that I talked about, open natural ecosystems. And then it tells you how far you are away from protected areas, because a lot of times protected areas have additional use requirements when you're buffered within 10 kilometers of protected areas.
Hey, Jim.
Yep.
Can you exit out of presentation mode on your PowerPoint? The guys on Zoom want to see that model, but they can't see it.
Exit out of what?
The PowerPoint presentation mode.
Oh, so I gotta escape here.
Yeah. I think so. And then bring up that other model.
Is that?
We might have to, you go to new share.
You share.
Yeah, and then share the
Okay. Are they seeing it now?
yeah,
Okay, thank you.
you're welcome.
So the other application is the planning application. Again, it has all the same information that you saw in the previous assessment tool. That's just, I guess, a reason why people should show up, right?
Yeah.
So the thing about the planning tool is we're really helping the state governments understand where to push development and incentivize development. So what we allow for them to do is pick a district. So here I'll just pick the district of Badar, and then I'll type in, what I'm looking for as far as capacity. So here I'm looking for 100 megawatts capacity, and then I run the assessment on that. And so it lists out the top 10 project areas, excuse me, that will actually meet that capacity that you inputted. And so the user can then go and click on the ranking to go to that area. And if they wanted to, they could actually click on that project area and run one of those assessments on that. So that's the tools in general. You can go to SiteRight India to mess around with them, several different states there that you can look at these tools and get more information about. And so with that, I'll open it up to any questions.
Got just a couple of minutes for questions, so.
What did you guys use to make this app? Is it a web app?
Oh, yeah, it's a web app. So basically it's all custom built using JavaScript API and then our GIS server on the back end.
So is it the Esri web app or?
Yeah, so the mapping services, the geoprocessing services are as a.
This is a custom application.
Yeah, so the whole wrapper was then developed by us.
And then how did you create that report? Like, are you using an extra tool or did you build the whole report?
So interestingly, behind the scenes, I already have an HTML file that then I just get information back from the geoprocessing server and then select that in the HTML and populate it.
Paddington has a question. He says local community or indigenous knowledge is considered important in development projects. To what extent did your work incorporate this knowledge in solar or wind projects?
Oh, that's a really great question. And actually, this is one of the first examples with that village level data, that social village level data, that we really incorporated social values. And what happened was FES, our partner that I identified before, they went out and interviewed a lot of different communities, a lot of different villages to understand, you know, that whole ranking scheme would then produce that cumulative index score. But it was something that we're actually looking to publish fairly soon. Good word. Yeah.
Is carbon capture and storage part of your solution or maybe part of your problem?
No, that's just Wyoming, right? But I have to say that doesn't mean that it's not for TNC. I don't work on that. So
Okay.
there definitely could be. And I bet you the Wyoming chapter has a lot more knowledge on that. Yeah.
Another one. I see that you guys hosted on S3 and then also about the partnership you guys made with Microsoft. I was wondering how would one might do that? How would WyGISC partner with Microsoft?
So
Just I don't know, in case if you know.
So our partnership with that's the beauty of working with TNC. We have a lot of people that are working on these different partnerships, and we have individuals that specifically only talk to one of the Bezos, like one person just focused on them, right? And so we get these partnerships a lot easier than somebody like WyGISC that's comes knocking at the door. We got people that are interacting with them daily. And so the Microsoft partnership, there's a lot of different things going on there. And this is just one component. And then we have a huge partnership with Amazon. And then Jeff Bezos donated 100 million to TNC just about 3 years ago for climate activity. So for climate science, really. Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah, it's incredible, honestly. But, you know, I mean, if you're, you know, here in Wyoming, you too can eventually get to something like this. And, you know, there's hope for you if you're hanging out the buckhorn. Yeah.
Do any of the models include putting the solar panels over the cropland? Because I know that's a new innovation
Right.
that's coming down the pike. I'm just wondering, probably not yet, but I'm
Right
just
now,
wondering if-
no. But we have been looking at that for sure. It's very crop dependent is what I've
I'm sure,
heard. Yeah. And so a lot of these crops are, you know, feeding millions of people. And so they're more bulk crops. And I don't know how well they respond to that. But there is a solar farm down outside of Boulder that does exactly that, that we're going to take a group of people from India to show them. Yeah, good question.
Cody, anything else online? Okay. Well, we're at the top of the hour, so we need to wrap up, but join me in thanking Jim again.
Hey out there. I saw some friends.